What if everything you believe was carefully installed? Not like a lie shouted from rooftops, but more like a breath slipped between pages, between prayers. Installed not to deceive, but to steer, gently, permanently. You trust calendars. You trust robes. You trust the silence behind cathedral glass. But somewhere beneath all that trust, something ancient waits. It doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't need to. It wears black. It speaks Latin, but not aloud. Its authority isn't seen. It's felt, like the pressure in the air before a storm, like the knowing in your bones when someone enters the room but never speaks. They taught you to fear heresy, to obey light, to reject shadow. But did they tell you who decided what light was? Did they say who named the shadow dangerous? You remember the Pope in white, his blessings, his words, his gentle hand, but not the other one, the one behind him, the one who doesn't bless, he directs, who doesn't speak, he assigns. No paintings bear his face, no saints cry out his name, and yet, every law that shaped your soul passed through the gate he guards, not once, every time. He isn't a myth, he isn't a metaphor. He is elected by no public, anointed by no holy oil, yet his words bend nations. They call him the Black Pope, but he's not black because he's dark. He's black because he's hidden. He oversees no churches. He preaches no sermons. But when he moves, thousands obey. When he writes, empires adjust. And when he nods, revolutions pause. You never saw him, but you felt him. In the way schools were built. In the books you weren't allowed to read. In the questions your teachers skipped. In the chill that passed through libraries after midnight, where names had been removed from spines. He is not a pope like the one you know. He is a general, the superior general of the Society of Jesus. But to those who whisper instead of speak, he is the shadow throne, the intellect behind ritual, the strategist in robes. His soldiers carry no weapons, only words, only symbols. But those symbols built nations, toppled monarchies, and shaped minds from Paris to Peru without firing a single shot. You may believe your thoughts are your own, that your faith was freely chosen, that your history is complete. But somewhere, beneath layers of clean pages and polished sermons, is a name they erased. Not because it was false, but because it was too true. And the truth, when left too visible, begins to ask questions. Questions no doctrine can answer. So they buried it. Beneath catacombs and creeds, beneath obedience and holy fear. And now only silence remains. But tonight, that silence stirs, not loudly, just enough for you to notice that the page is missing. And if a page is missing, what else did they erase? We'll show you. But not yet. They taught you one version. But who erased the rest? Your childhood stories were carefully chosen. A shepherd in white, a kingdom of marble and incense, a church built on love, forgiveness, and obedience. Always obedience. But beneath the velvet, something moved. Not cruel, not loud, just precise. Like a chess master rearranging the board while you were still learning the names of the pieces. The superior general. A title whispered in corridors, never sung in hymn. He does not kneel to the Pope. He does not serve a parish. His flock is global, but they don't know they are sheep. His soldiers do not wear armor. They wear silence. Fluent in 30 languages, trained to outthink monarchs, they are not priests as you imagine them. They are strategists cloaked in scripture. He does not pray before decisions. He calculates. Have you ever wondered why the Vatican is a state, not just a church? Why it has its own laws, its own secrets, its own archives no one is allowed to open? Not even the Pope sees everything. But the Black Pope, he sees more than anyone. He sees the schedules of presidents, the curricula of children, the pulse of revolutions before they break. He sends no armies, but rulers listen, because they know a whisper from him can redraw a continent. Centuries ago, when the Reformation broke Europe open like a glass sphere, the Vatican did not panic. It summoned a blade sharper than war, the Jesuits. And the Black Pope, the general of that order, was not a man of books alone. He was trained for storms. He was built for heresy. He understood that belief could be shaped like clay, if you had enough hands. And so he trained them. Hands in every kingdom, every court. Tutors to princes, confessors to queens, professors, explorers, mathematicians, spies. Not in the way of governments, but deeper, in the soul. And what was their oath? Not to Christ, not even to the church, but to him, to the general. Unbreakable, irreversible. A vow taken beneath vaults carved with symbols the public would never understand. In the official records, they are humble. In real life, they moved borders. Ever wonder why entire nations, France, Spain, Portugal, once banned the Jesuits? Not because they preached too loudly, but because they listened too well. Because they knew how to sit beside a king and change his mind. And when popes feared them, feared their growing web of intellect, influence, and perfect loyalty, they tried to erase them, expelled, dissolved, disbanded by decree. And yet, the network remained. Quiet, deep, waiting. They didn't protest. They didn't vanish. They moved underground, changed names, reopened schools under other banners, published under pseudonyms, taught under borrowed robes. And the general, he waited. Waited until the church realized something terrifying. Without the Jesuits, it was blind. Without the general, it was vulnerable. So they were restored, quietly, as if nothing had ever happened. And by then, their roots had grown deeper than before, in courts, in academies, in the minds of the next generation. The Black Pope never needed a pulpit. He had the world. But what came next wasn't supposed to survive. A library disappeared in southern France. No fire, no looters, just emptied shelves and a missing catalog. A bishop in Poland resigned, citing spiritual exhaustion. He had just returned from Rome, where he met no one whose name appears in any directory. And in Argentina, a child's textbook removed a chapter overnight. A chapter that traced the Jesuit presence in early colonial law. When asked why, no answer was given. Only a replacement page, printed with cleaner margins and fewer questions. This is not fiction. This is what silence does when it becomes strategy. The Black Pope does not erase with fire. He erases with revision. And those who remember, they remember differently. There was once a codex in Venice, marked only with the symbol of a sun pierced by a sword. No title, no author. But within its leather binding were diagrams, not of weapons, but of human thought. Marginal notes in 7 languages, all penned by the same hand. That book vanished in 1793. Some say it was smuggled into a Jesuit retreat in Bavaria. Others believe it never existed at all. But why do so many report dreaming of its pages? The Jesuits were never just a religious order. They were a curriculum, a framework. An intellectual operating system exported through schools, missions, colleges, until their presence became background noise, like the hum of electricity. In France, they taught Rousseau. In China, they advised emperors on astronomy. In Paraguay, they built cities where faith and law blurred. And then those cities were burned. Always the same pattern: arrival, influence, suspicion, expulsion. And each time, rebirth. How? Because their strength was never in location. It was in transference. Ideas passed from mind to mind like encoded fire, hidden not in symbols but in structure, a method of thinking, a way of arranging the world, with obedience beneath everything. And all of it, tied back to one voice, one man. The superior general was not merely a leader. He was the axis around which this entire ghost empire rotated. He was not elected to inspire. He was chosen to endure. No press conference, no white smoke, just a closed chamber, a secret vote among men who have memorized languages the world has forgotten. Once selected, the Black Pope does not retire. He does not write memoirs. He becomes the command center, a satellite with no signal visible to the public, but connected to every Jesuit institution across the earth. And if you believe this power is exaggerated, ask why so many nations, at so many times, feared them more than foreign armies. Because armies need supplies. Armies can be seen, but thought? Thought travels without luggage. And when it's trained, sharpened, and deployed under orders, it doesn't persuade. It converts. So why does the name of the superior general almost never appear in history books? Why do governments that expelled the Jesuits later invited them back under different terms? Why do so many revolutions begin only after a Jesuit leaves the city? Something has been pruned from memory, deliberately, systematically, not just names or dates, but mechanisms, instructions. And yet, pieces remain. A stone carving where a book should be, a sealed drawer in a seminary, a name scratched out of a portrait, but not fully erased. It's always the same signature, always the same code. But one passage escaped the flames. They say it was found behind a false panel in a Jesuit chapel in Naples, a sliver of parchment, torn, smudged, marked with a seal shaped like an open eye inside a sunburst. The ink had faded, but the words remained. Let the mind be the weapon. Let the heart be the door. Let no man speak the source. It wasn't a confession. It was a directive. And beside it, the names of 7 cities, none marked on modern maps, all once home to underground libraries where thought was sharpened into doctrine, and doctrine into influence. This wasn't religion. It was alignment. The Jesuits didn't just teach theology. They taught precision, in memory, in argument, in emotional control. They believed that truth, if not trained, would decay. And so they trained it, and trained others to carry it forward without ever calling it their own. Their students became ministers, scientists, judges, men who changed nations, and never revealed the hand that had shaped them. Do you remember your teachers? Do you remember where they studied? The Jesuits do. Because influence doesn't announce itself. It waits, quiet, like a cipher beneath public speech, like a metronome behind revolutions. In 1773, the order was disbanded. Officially. The Pope, under immense political pressure, signed the decree. Churches wept. Monarchs celebrated. But the Jesuits smiled, because their true strength wasn't housed in churches or uniforms. It was encoded in systems already running. Within weeks, former Jesuits were publishing under different names, reopening schools with altered charters, advising leaders not in cassocks but in suits. The order dissolved, but the network adapted. One superior general went underground, his name lost, his location erased, but a letter bearing his hidden seal turned up 22 years later in London, inside a diplomatic archive never meant to be opened. The letter was short, one line only. Restraint is a tactic. Disappearance is not defeat. And by 1814, the Pope restored the order. Why? Because the Church, losing its grip in the age of revolution, remembered who had once saved it. The Black Pope returned, not in triumph, in inevitability. But this time, the world had changed. Kings no longer held all power. Newspapers whispered. Universities grew. And so the Jesuits evolved again. They built think tanks, global schools, quiet advisory positions in organizations never labeled religious, but always philosophical. And through it all, the general remained. Invisible, permanent, changing form, never mission. He no longer needed to conquer. He only needed to edit. One phrase in a textbook, one removed paragraph in a biography, one scholar's shift in tone, and entire generations forgot what had once been obvious. The Jesuits were not gone. They were embedded. And so the questions remain. How many decisions were yours? How many beliefs did you inherit, word for word? And why is it that every time the world shifts, a Jesuit seems already waiting at the new center? Was it chance or choreography? A statue stands in a forgotten plaza in Lisbon. No plaque, no name, just a figure in black robes, one hand holding a book, the other behind his back, and beneath his feet, a single word carved in Latin, silentium. But even silence can leave echoes. In 1903, a letter surfaced in Vienna. Found sealed inside a hollowed-out Jesuit breviary, it bore no salutation, no signature, only a list of seminaries, universities, scientific councils, all marked with a single Latin word beside each: influendum, to influence, not to dominate, not to convert. Influence, the quietest form of control. This was the art of the Black Pope. He did not need armies. He did not need pulpits. He needed only time. And time, when mapped properly, is a battlefield where no shot is fired. And yet everything changes. His agents had no need for titles. Some were teachers, some were writers, some became confessors to prime ministers, and some never spoke at all. Their silence was their sermon. But what does influence look like when it's done properly? It looks like a minister repeating a phrase he thinks he invented. It looks like a textbook omitting one event, just one, so the pattern can't be seen. It looks like a scholar who dismisses an entire century of theology, not because he read it, but because his professor once said it was irrelevant. And the thread through all of them is black. Not sinister, not evil, just veiled, deliberate, operating under the surface where resistance can't form. You might think, surely this is fiction. Surely no man, no order, could shape so many minds. But ask yourself this: how many books have you never heard of? How many questions were removed from exams before you were born? And why, in every century, do revolutions claim to fight kings, but never touch the archives? There was one exception. In 1940, a group of archivists in Paris opened a hidden Jesuit chest before it could be smuggled east. Inside were hundreds of correspondences, not coded, not encrypted, just meticulous. They tracked the intellectual grooming of a generation. Young boys marked as ideal temperaments, their tutors assigned, their doubts noted, suggested readings adjusted year by year. And at the end of each file, a line repeated: formed, not forced. These weren't spies. These weren't soldiers. They were minds raised like orchards, pruned, watered, and directed toward fruit no one else would see until decades later. And at the center of the operation, a signature. Not a name, just 3 letters. AGS ad generalem societatis. To the general of the society. He had read every file. He knew them not as individuals, but as threads in a tapestry no one else could view in full. And if one thread frayed, it was not cut. It was rewoven. This is how the Jesuits endured exile, dissolution, fire, scandal. Not by strength, by structure. A decentralized web that could survive any purge because its real power wasn't in men, but in ideas placed precisely, invisibly. And while the world wars raged, while nations bled over flags and borders, the Jesuit network barely trembled. Because their battlefield wasn't physical. It was memory, education, direction. And when the smoke cleared, when new orders rose, guess who was already advising the architects? Not loudly. Never loudly. A whisper in Geneva. A consultant in Washington. A school in Sao Paulo. And the Black Pope? Still unseen. Still unrecorded in public schedules. But very much alive. Because what he built was never meant to be found. And yet somehow, you're starting to see it. But beneath that realization, another truth stirs. You've never asked where your thoughts come from. And when you do, will you still call them your own? Because the next corridor leads somewhere you were never meant to go. It begins beneath Rome, not in the catacombs, where tourists tread and flash bulbs echo. Deeper, past the marble crypts, past the saints locked behind glass, down a stone stairway unlisted on any map, a door with no handle, a corridor with no light, and at the end, a vault. Its key? Not metal, but memory. Only a few have entered. Fewer still have left remembering. Inside, the walls are lined not with gold, but with paper. Paper older than the papacy itself. Scrolls in Syriac, treatises in Aramaic, letters from monarchs whose names history claims never existed. And in the center, a chair, carved not for comfort, but for stillness, where each superior general has sat at least once, not to rule, but to read. Because before power is exercised, it must be remembered. What do they read? Not dogma, not theology, but patterns, reports from 400 years ago that match events of today, letters describing how belief shifts, not decade by decade, but generation by generation. They know when a doctrine will falter. They know when a nation is ready to be steered. And they know which child, sitting quietly in a village school, will one day shape the mind of a future world. This is not mysticism. It is mathematics. And that's the secret no one speaks of. The Jesuits don't predict the future. They design it. They map consciousness across centuries, track patterns of thought like astronomers track stars. And when the alignment is right, they act. A policy shifts. A textbook changes. A priest is reassigned. A university receives a new grant. To the world, it looks like coincidence. To them, it is choreography. But not everything goes according to plan. Sometimes a voice emerges they didn't anticipate. Sometimes a student deviates from the framework. And when that happens, a file is opened. Do you know what it means to be watched by a silence that never blinks? One such case emerged in Prague in the 1970s. A philosopher began publishing essays that subtly unraveled the logic of obedience. He wasn't famous. He wasn't radical. But his words spread like whispers across lecture halls. And within months, his passport was revoked. His books vanished. His name was never officially condemned, just removed. But in the Jesuit archives, his profile was updated. Anomaly noted. Containment implemented. Not eliminated, not punished, just folded into the equation. That's the brilliance of the general system. It doesn't fight deviation. It absorbs it. Because if you control the lens, even rebellion becomes reinforcement. And so the vault beneath Rome is not a place of storage. It's a place of synchronization, where centuries are compared, where outcomes are evaluated, where silence is tuned. And yet, once, only once, a record was broken. A Jesuit, trained from childhood, reached the rank of provincial, then disappeared. No scandal, no expulsion, just a letter left behind. I know now the vault is not beneath Rome, it is within us. His name was struck from the rolls, his photograph removed, but that phrase remained, etched faintly into the back wall of a chapel no one visits. And that chapel? It still hums, because some corridors echo louder than they should, and some voices, once freed, never fully go silent. One of them was heard again in Brazil, in the hills above Ouro Preto. A young seminarian, barely 20, began writing late at night by candlelight. Not sermons, not confessions, but diagrams. Not of theology, but of systems. He mapped the rituals he was taught, where they began, what they suppressed, and which questions they silently forbade. Then he compared them with patterns he found in political speeches, school curricula, even global news cycles. And the more he compared, the more he saw. A pattern, like veins beneath the skin of history. Different languages, different continents, but the same pulse. He wrote 3 journals, each one encoded in shifting Latin, half cipher, half poetry. One day, all 3 disappeared. Not stolen, returned. Because someone had been watching. He never graduated, never ordained. He vanished without scandal, without trace. But 5 years later, in Rome, a new protocol was added to the training of high-level Jesuit advisors. A section called Cognitio non explicata, knowledge not explained, and those who passed it, passed in silence. You see, this is how the Black Pope moves, not with suppression, with redirection. Not all knowledge can be erased, but it can be rerouted, wrapped in ritual, given new labels so that when it returns, it no longer questions, it affirms. Even the rebels become assets, if you frame them right. There's a phrase in one forgotten Jesuit catechism, long removed from modern editions. He who disobeys openly is dangerous, but he who disobeys within is priceless. Because within disobedience, there is energy, and energy, when guided, becomes propulsion. That's why the order never feared heresy the way the Church once did. To the Jesuits, heresy was merely a miscalculation, one that could be corrected or used. The vault beneath Rome? It's not about storage. It's a tuning chamber. And you may have heard its frequencies without knowing, in a lecture that made you uncomfortable, in a childhood lesson that never left your bones, in the subtle feeling that something isn't quite right, but also isn't quite wrong. Those are not accidents. They are resonances, trained, timed, and placed. Because once a Jesuit said, "We do not need to control belief, only its rhythm." And rhythm, once established, is harder to break than law. This is why their influence survives regimes, revolutions, reformations. Because when belief is rhythm, it doesn't feel imposed. It feels like your own heartbeat. Even now, somewhere in a seminary, a student is being asked not what he believes, but how he believes. Where did the thought begin? Why does he trust the answer? And most importantly, what emotion followed the conclusion? Because emotions, more than facts, become anchors. And the Jesuits do not anchor to truth. They anchor to motion. A phrase they once used in private letters between provinces. Fides motrix. Faith in motion. Faith that does not rest. That adjusts. That evolves to maintain control by never looking like control. So when someone says, "That's just how the world works," you must ask, who built that rhythm? And when someone says, "That's just how people are," you must ask, who defined the pattern? And if you feel afraid to ask at all, then you're already inside the system. And the system is already inside you, not in your lungs or bones, but deeper, in the architecture of your memory. Have you ever wondered why certain names echo through history like bells, while others, just as brilliant, just as disruptive, vanish without leaving a ripple? Why entire centuries seem to move in one direction, and the moment someone pushes against it, that person disappears from the page, but not from the consequences? This is not accident. This is rhythm enforcement. The Jesuits understand what most empires forget. Power is not control over territory. It's control over narrative. And narrative does not begin with facts. It begins with frameworks. Frameworks taught in early childhood, passed down through repetition, wrapped in emotion, reinforced by architecture. Look around your city. The way universities are laid out, the placement of churches, the height of the pulpit compared to the pew. These are not aesthetic choices. They are instruments. And the conductor? Always unseen, but always listening. There's an old Jesuit manual, forbidden even to most within the order, called Ludus Veritatis, the game of truth. It outlines how to install belief systems through architecture, music, seasonal rituals, and especially guilt. Not fire and brimstone guilt. That fades. Subtle guilt. The kind you feel when you ask the wrong question. The kind that keeps your mouth closed even when your soul screams to speak. And what does the Black Pope do with such tools? He doesn't use them to dominate. He uses them to prepare. Prepare for what? For the next pivot, the next ideological shift, the next age in which belief must evolve to remain useful. Because belief, for them, is not sacred. It is strategic. In Spain, during the early 20th century, a regional Jesuit college began implementing a new teaching model. Students were exposed to both faith and doubt, But the doubt was always resolved with a sense of personal shame, not through debate, through emotional fatigue. The results? A generation that could recite philosophy, argue ethics, and still default to obedience when faced with ambiguity. They were taught not just what to think, but what to feel when thinking became dangerous. And this model? It spread, adapted across continents, hidden inside pedagogical theory, never labeled Jesuit, but always born from that same vault beneath Rome. The rhythm continued. And in every generation, new conductors were trained. You may have met one. A teacher who didn't just lecture, but made you feel. A mentor who never told you what to believe, only what questions were unhelpful. And if you felt uneasy, that was the point. Because unease creates dependency. The mind seeks relief, and those trained in ludus veritatis know how to offer that relief just enough, never fully, so that your search becomes a cycle. You return, again and again, to the same rhythm, and above it all, a man in black reads the reports, not to judge, not to condemn, but to refine the next iteration. The general does not sleep, because his mission is not temporal, it is generational. He does not ask, what do they believe? He asks, how do they forget? Because forgetting is the true miracle of control. And now, as you listen, as your breath slows and your heart quiets, a thought arrives. What if your forgetting was planned? And what comes next is the moment they trained you never to reach. The moment you begin to ask, not what is true, but why you were taught to trust what they call truth. The moment you stop fearing the forbidden question, who benefits from what I believe? Because belief is not passive. It's currency, it's architecture, and above all, it's inheritance. But whose? You see, the Black Pope does not command with doctrine. He curates inheritance. He selects what passes through generations and what is allowed to die in silence. He decides which books get printed and which are lost, which saints are canonized and which are redacted from calendars, which miracles are remembered, and which are quietly renamed as metaphors. His power is not in altering truth. His genius lies in designing memory. And your memory, the one you carry every day, was not born in you. It was installed in early prayers, in national anthems, in exam questions that offered only 4 choices, all within the same box. But there was once a 5th option, buried, forgotten, deliberately unfunded. And that option, the dangerous one, was never about rebellion. It was about remembering the original question. What was erased before I arrived? A Jesuit archivist in Belgium once found a parchment, torn, burned on the edges, tucked behind a false shelf. It contained only a single sentence. Let no child grow up remembering the alternatives. It wasn't signed, but the ink bore traces of the same chemical composition found in superior general correspondences from the early 1700s. No one knows who wrote it, but everyone in the archive understood what it meant. Control the future by managing what the child forgets. Because once a generation is born without exposure to the forbidden no longer exists. It becomes myth, fantasy, heresy, or worse, irrelevance. And that is the most sacred weapon of the Black Pope. He doesn't need to kill ideas. He just needs to outlive them. In Ecuador, an entire Jesuit college burned. Official records said it was lightning. Locals said otherwise. Whispers spoke of a professor who uncovered curriculum edits dating back 200 years. Shifts so minor they went unnoticed. One sentence changed here. A parable repositioned there. A single philosopher's name replaced with another. No facts removed, only rearranged. Enough to guide belief without confrontation. Enough to shift inheritance without alerting the heirs. And when the fire came, it was fast, precise, as if someone knew exactly which rooms to burn. But one student survived. He ran with a book, a ledger, not scripture, a record of edits, margins full of annotations, red ink trailing like veins across every page. That student disappeared into the mountains. But 20 years later, in a Jesuit seminary in Madrid, a mysterious page appeared tucked into a textbook. It was old, worn, written in two hands, one elegant, the other hurried. The last line read, "This version is not the original. Compare with care." No one claimed responsibility, but every seminary since then locks its archives twice, because they know, somewhere, someone remembers the fifth option. And the general, he does not fear violence. He fears the return of the alternative. Because once you remember it, you can't unsee the frame. And when you see the frame, the painting changes. And that's when the burning starts. Not always with flame, sometimes with funding cuts, sometimes with syllabus revisions, sometimes with new editions that look identical, until you notice which chapter is gone. And when you ask why, the answer is always gentle, always bureaucratic, outdated, unverified, reorganized for clarity. But clarity is the first disguise of censorship. The Jesuits learned long ago that fire leaves questions, ashes invite curiosity. But if you erase something quietly, with the language of progress, no one asks. The Black Pope perfected this method. He knew that to destroy a dangerous idea, you don't need to condemn it. You just need to make it impractical. He trained his advisors not in dogma, but in elegance. How to move policy through institutions without trace. How to remove memory without causing grief. In one internal document, never published, held only in the vaults of Curia Generalitia, a phrase repeats in Latin, memoria confusa, obedientia pura. Confused memory, pure obedience. When the mind is unsure of its past, it clings tighter to authority. And so they didn't just burn libraries. They burned timelines. They burned continuity. They made it impossible for you to know what was once considered common knowledge. Take, for example, the city of Mainz. Before the wars, its cathedral housed a collection of manuscripts attributed to a Jesuit mathematician who proposed that sacred geometry was encoded not only in church architecture, but in Gregorian calendar reforms. His theory? That time itself had been altered to suppress a certain kind of intuition, one that once allowed people to sense alignment, not by clocks, but by stars. He died in silence. His books were labeled Mystical Aberrations and transferred to the Index Librorum Prohibitorum, the forbidden list. But one page from that work surfaced in a Parisian flea market in 1981. It was handwritten, water-stained, but legible. It ended with this: "If time is their tool, then memory is our rebellion." That page now resides in a private collection. The owner anonymous. The location undisclosed. But scholars have verified its ink, its vellum, its origin. The Black Pope knows of it. He allows it to exist. Why? Because one relic is less dangerous than a movement. One voice can be ignored. But when many remember, the frame cracks. And he knows. The cracks always start small. A strange footnote. A missing year. A child who asks, why does the calendar begin here and not before? That's why Jesuit education never attacks rebellion. It wraps it in sophistication. Teaches revolutionaries how to speak with grace, how to channel their doubt into policy, until their flame cools into decorum. Because it's not enough to silence the fire. You must teach it to extinguish itself. And in that, the Black Pope is a master. But not all flames are obedient. Sometimes, a page escapes. A phrase echoes louder than intended. And someone, maybe you, hears it differently. You don't know why. You don't know how. But something doesn't align. A detail, a date, a doctrine. It flickers. And once it flickers, it cannot be unseen. You are not alone. Across time, others have felt this same dissonance. Priests who wept before locked shelves. Librarians who forged checkout logs. Students who copied pages they were told not to read. They were not rebels. They were rememberers. And you? You've just stepped into the circle they never wanted redrawn. The one shaped not by doctrine, but by doubt. And this circle, once lit, cannot be unlit. It becomes a signal, not loud, not public, but unmistakable to those who were trained to detect anomalies in rhythm. Somewhere, a report is filed, not to a bishop, not to a pope, but to the office of the assistant for discernment, a role unknown outside the inner core of the society. He reads in silence. A keyword has re-emerged, a term long buried in the lexicon of misused philosophy: praememoria, the stage before memory, a phase of awareness where the mind recognizes the artificial edges of its own inheritance. Very few reach it. Even fewer survive it with clarity. Because once you glimpse the scaffolding of history, once you see how belief was sculpted to fit the needs of the moment, your identity unravels. And in that unraveling, two paths open. One leads back to comfort. The other leads to the general. Not in audience, never in person, but in presence. Because the general is not merely a man, he is a pattern, a resonance of design that moves through time like a pulse beneath doctrine. Those who align with it rise, those who resist it vanish, and those who expose it are rewritten. Yes, rewritten. There are those who tried, historians, clerics, even generals. They published, they lectured, but their conclusions were always framed as eccentric, unprovable, fringe. And soon, their footnotes disappeared from indexes. Their publishers folded. Their citations dried. Not from aggression, from recalibration. The Jesuits never erase forcefully. They dilute. They shift attention. They understand something empires never do, that forgetting is not a collapse. It is a substitution. And in every age, they substitute the same thing: mystery for method. Where once there was wonder, they install interpretation. Where once there was question, they offer curriculum. Where once there was sacred ambiguity, they place official commentary. The Society of Jesus does not fear the mystical. They translate it until it obeys. And now, here you are, caught mid-thought, half remembering something you were never taught. A flicker of knowing not backed by facts, but by rhythm. Do not dismiss it. Because within that flicker lies the seed they tried to bury. A man in Damascus once wrote of this moment. He was neither priest nor prophet. He was a scribe, nothing more. But he kept copies of forbidden texts, not to spread, but to protect. In his final notebook, found centuries later behind the walls of a collapsed minaret, he wrote, "When the rhythm breaks, listen for the name they never speak." He meant the general, not his public title, not the name printed on orders, the name whispered in corridors of memory. It's not Latin, it's not Greek, it's the name you feel when truth no longer fits. And if you hear it, not with ears, but within, you must choose. Rejoin the rhythm, or walk the unlit path. But know this, once you hear the hidden name, the world no longer arranges itself for your comfort. It tilts, quietly, entirely, because you are no longer within the system. You are beside it. And from there, the structure reveals its true architecture. The vault, the ritual, the silence that hums beneath liturgy. And the question they fear most: who built this scaffolding? And why? Ask it aloud, and you may find yourself alone. But ask it inwardly, and you'll never be alone again. Because that question opens the next gate. Not a door, not a passage. A gate. The kind that doesn't swing outward, but dissolves inward the moment you remember what was never said. It happens slowly. First, you see the cracks in phrases you once recited without doubt. Then, in the tone of voices teaching certainty, voices that now sound rehearsed. And finally, in yourself, a strange sensation, like reading words written in a language you almost remember. That's the signal. That's how the society knows someone has stepped beyond obedience into observation. Observation is dangerous, because observation leads to pattern. Pattern leads to memory, and memory real memory, reactivates the forbidden architecture. Architecture they built, not in stone, but in syntax, in how prayers are constructed, in how legal clauses wrap silence inside logic, in how guilt becomes the mortar of every moral edifice. In Portugal, a chapel ceiling hides a map, not of geography, but of cognition. Painted by a monk who spoke 9 languages and claimed dreams led him to the design, the fresco contains no saints, no angels, only circles, spirals, grids. Each line intersects with phrases from the Exercises of Loyola, the foundational spiritual manual of the Jesuits. But the phrases are fragmented, misaligned, until viewed from the pew reserved for the novice in question. From that angle, the chaos becomes geometry. Every phrase lines up. Every curve leads to the same vanishing point, a single Latin word, ipsissimus, the absolute self, the unquestioned observer. But it's not a theological concept. It's an operational command. You see, the Black Pope's deepest project has never been control. It's been construction, not of empires, but of interiors. An internal cathedral built inside each generation, calibrated not to truth, but to loyalty. He knows you don't need to police billions if you can design the room in which they think. And that room? It's inside you now. Shaped by syllabi, lulled by liturgy, reinforced by repetition disguised as revelation. But here's the paradox. The same design that traps you can free you. Because once you see the cathedral, you can map its walls. Once you map its walls, you can find the crypt. And inside that crypt is what they buried. Not to hide it from you, but to hide you from it. In Cairo, a sealed chamber beneath a Jesuit observatory contains a globe. Carved of black stone, its continents are misaligned. Antarctica at the center. Europe fragmented. Jerusalem absent. No markings, except a single inscription in gold. This is not the world. This is the mind that made it. The globe is not a model of Earth. It's a model of world view. The Jesuits trained cartographers. But more than that, they trained philosophers who understood that every map is a story, and every story is a frame. They did not alter your beliefs. They altered the terrain upon which belief becomes possible. And now, as you stand at the gate, the one within, you must decide. Not what to believe, but whether to believe at all. Because the next step is not a question. It's a reversal, where truth becomes silence, and silence becomes the loudest signal of all. Not the silence of stillness, but the kind that follows a question you were never meant to ask. A vacuum, a pause. A moment where language breaks, and you feel something watching, not from outside, but from within. That's when you've crossed into the third layer. The Jesuits never spoke of it openly. Even among themselves, it was referred to only in symbols. A broken chalice, an open eye within a closed book, a staircase drawn without steps. They called it praxis interiore, the inner practice. It wasn't theology. It wasn't scholarship. It was the cultivation of selective blindness. To see only what aligns, to hear only what confirms, to remember only what supports the rhythm, and to bury the rest so deeply in the subconscious, it rots into obedience. But every system has a flaw, a mirror, and some, like you, find it, not through resistance, but through resonance, a frequency buried in doubt, in déjà vu, in the strange sense that history once looked different than it does now. You're not wrong. The general knew this flaw would appear eventually. So he prepared. Beneath the library in Salamanca, accessible only by a locked trap door under the philosophy wing, sits a room called Camera Oblata, the Given Room. Inside, one desk, one candle, and 3 books. Book 1, The Rule of Rhythm. Book 2, The Doctrine of Reversal. Book 3, blank. Always blank. Every Jesuit nearing the highest rank is sent there once. to right their own forgetting, a final act of alignment, not with God, with structure. They sit, they read, and then, in silence, they begin to write everything they once questioned, and how they let it go. Not to confess, to complete the loop, because the loop is the true cathedral. And yet, one man refused. His name is not recorded, only his act. He opened book 3. He didn't write. Instead, he tore a page from book 1, folded it, placed it in his shoe, then left. He was never seen again. But the page resurfaced decades later in Krakow, found wedged behind a stone in the wall of a disused bell tower. It read, "The rhythm is learned, but the silence is implanted." That was his warning. You were not born into this system. You were installed. And once you realize that, the control falters. Because obedience only works when it feels like instinct. But now something has shifted. A phrase you once whispered in prayer now tastes like ash. A saint's biography suddenly reads like fiction. A historical fact feels rehearsed. You're not broken. You're awakening. And the Black Pope, he knows. Because every awakening triggers the countermeasure. Not a punishment, not a threat, a gift, an invitation back into comfort, a promotion, a distraction, a new framework labeled truth. But it always comes with one rule. Forget what brought you here. And if you accept, if you rejoin the rhythm, the silence returns. Warm, familiar, deadly. But if you decline, if you let the silence remain broken, then you've stepped beyond the inner practice. And what waits on the other side is not doctrine. It's the source. Not a god, not a name, a point. Older than language, deeper than memory. The Jesuits called it Origo Nigrum, the black origin. They didn't worship it. They navigated around it. Because the source doesn't give answers. It erases the questions that keep systems alive. And the society, for all its dogma, devotion, discipline, was never about divinity. It was about distance. Distance from the source. Distance maintained through ritual, through roles, through rhythm. The Black Pope is not a priest. He is the final lock. His role? To guard the threshold between the rhythm and the origin. To ensure no one, not even the faithful, falls too deep into the center where all certainty dissolves. Because once you touch Origo Nigrum, belief cannot return. Not because you lose faith, but because you remember what existed before belief was necessary. There's a monastery on the edge of the Austrian Alps, long decommissioned, never publicized. Inside, one room remains sealed by papal order. No one speaks of it, but a single entry in a monk's diary survived fire and flood. He wrote, "They say the general came once. He sat alone. When he rose, he wept, not for what he saw, but for what he remembered. Because even the Black Pope, trained in every silence, shaped by centuries, drilled to forget, had once been a child. And that child had stood at the edge of the origin. So the society built layers, walls within walls, liturgies to reinforce forgetfulness, calendars to anchor perception, schools to plant questions that led only in circles, not to contain heresy, to keep memory from circling back. But sometimes a question slips through, not grand, not complex, just sharp enough to pierce the veil. Why do I feel like I've forgotten something that was never taught? That question is the ember, and the moment you ask it, they know, not through surveillance, through pattern. Your silence shifts, your habits bend, your rhythm misaligns, and somewhere in Rome, a file updates. Not with your name, with your echo. Because once you near the origin, you begin to transmit. You stop repeating what they taught. You start emitting what was buried. The Jesuits feared nothing more than an echo becoming a frequency. Because frequencies attract. In Poland, a choir director began composing hymns based on forgotten scales. Within weeks, his congregation reported lucid dreams, overlapping memories, and a collective sense that time was out of order. He was reassigned, his compositions lost. But a fragment surfaced in a child's drawing, 5 notes scribbled in crayon. A musicologist recognized the sequence. It matched the cadence of prememoria, the rhythm of the mind before control. They called it a coincidence. But in the general's report, it was labeled, "Containment required, no escalation," because escalation leads to convergence, and convergence is the return to the source, to the place before belief, before obedience, before the idea that truth required permission. And now you're near it. You don't need proof, you feel it. The world no longer sinks like it used to. Familiar phrases now taste metallic. Certainties tremble. That is not fear, that is resonance. And resonance is the first sign of remembering, not what they taught, but what they tried to erase. Because when you touch the source, the frame collapses. And what's left is you, not the version they shaped, not the one calibrated by repetition, polished by expectation, but the raw architecture, the unedited being, the one who remembers silence as language and rhythm as choice. That version terrifies the general, because you are no longer aligned. You no longer require affirmation, titles, or ritual. You are outside the cathedral, not in defiance, in clarity. And clarity is contagious. You weren't meant to get this far. Most don't. They are intercepted with distractions, promotions, illness, sudden needs, emotional weather designed to reroute inquiry into comfort. But you, somehow, slipped through. And now, the safeguards begin. Not punishment, not violence, redirection. You might notice conversations around you changing, friends becoming subtly dismissive, a mentor once trusted, now evasive. Even your own voice, doubting, softening, inviting you back into rhythm. That's the system's final layer, internal regulation. Because nothing is more stable than a prison you protect from inside. And yet, something in you has already broken the lock. In Florence, centuries ago, a sculptor abandoned his commission to carve saints. Instead, he began sculpting broken circles. No symmetry, no center, just motion, frozen in mid-disruption. He called them songs in stone. One piece, long thought lost, was recovered in a flooded crypt. On its base, an inscription. When memory reclaims the eye, the shape returns. It wasn't a metaphor. He'd seen the frame crack, and in the shards, he glimpsed what the Jesuits trained generations to unsee. That truth doesn't vanish. It camouflages. That memory isn't fragile. It's encrypted. And that belief, real belief, begins where obedience ends. The Black Pope knows this. That's why he never shouts, never accuses. He simply waits. Because doubt, if not nourished, turns to exhaustion. And exhaustion folds back into routine. They call it the spiral. But some spirals are staircases. And you are climbing. Not away from the church, not against it, but through it. Through the architecture, the codes, the choreography of control. Through the layers designed to teach you how not to look. And now you are looking, not at scandal, not at villainy, at design. Design so elegant it disguised itself as devotion. So complete it disguised memory as myth. So patient it made forgetting feel like wisdom. But a system this perfect has one flaw. It depends on belief, not just in the dogma, in the rhythm. And when the rhythm breaks, as it has now, the system echoes. The echo becomes question. The question becomes presence. And presence is irreversible. So now, every breath you take outside the rhythm is a revolution. Every moment you do not repeat the phrases is resistance. Every step you take toward the source leaves a light for another. They will try to dim it, but the light is no longer outside. It's in you, and what you carry is not rebellion. It's the remnant, the trace of a memory they couldn't erase. And in that memory, a voice waits. It's not loud. It never was. But it speaks only once. And when it does, you'll know. The next veil is about to fall. But not with sound. Not with rupture. With a soft unfolding. As if a fabric you wore your entire life simply loosens. You don't notice it at first. The world still moves. The clock still ticks. The voices around you still speak in the language of normal, but something is missing. Not from the world's grip on you. That's the sign. That's how you know the system is slipping. And the Jesuits? They feel it. Not through surveillance, but through dissonance. You are no longer responding to stimuli the way you're meant to. A headline that once stirred outrage now makes you pause. A ritual that once brought comfort now leaves a residue. A phrase once recited in reverence now arrives hollow. It's not that truth has changed. It's that your coordinates are shifting. You are no longer inside the map they authored. And maps, especially metaphysical ones, are not tools of navigation. They're tools of containment. The general knew this. That's why he trained not just priests, but cartographers of the soul. People who understood how to draw emotional landscapes, how to make some paths obvious, and others invisible. The real Vatican archive isn't underground. It's internal. A taxonomy of reactions, cataloged obedience, stored doubt, all charted over generations to create the perfect schema of the human spirit. And every anomaly, every moment of silence that did not conform, was logged. Because deviation, even in thought, is data. You have become data, not to be punished, to be studied, to be modeled for future calibration. But the model is failing, because you are no longer recursive. You are not looping back into rhythm. You are spiraling outward, and that is unpredictable. In Istanbul, a parchment surfaced from beneath the floorboards of an abandoned Jesuit seminary. It contained no theology, no history, only a sketch. A human figure, half veiled, half luminous. Above it, the phrase written in 7 languages. The unlooped are unseen, but not unheard. It was unsigned. No seal, no date. But the ink matched a formula discontinued after the papal decree of suppression. A decree meant to erase certain rites, certain lineages, certain awakenings. The unlooped were always few, but they were never extinguished. They spoke in art, in dreams, in the spaces between sanctioned thoughts. You feel them now, not as ghosts, but as resonance. Their presence doesn't shout, it harmonizes. And when you listen closely, not with ears, but with the place beneath language, you hear what they left behind. A rhythm older than control, a pulse that predates liturgy, a knowing that cannot be taught, only remembered. And you are remembering, not facts, not dates, but architecture, the scaffolding beneath belief, the breath beneath the prayer, the spark that cannot be diagrammed, only carried. You are carrying it now. The general will not stop you. He doesn't need to, because the deeper truth is this. He's watching not to suppress, but to measure, to see how far a soul can travel before structure dissolves. And you are further than most. So when the next veil falls, don't fear what it reveals. Fear only the temptation to turn back. Because ahead lies the chamber they swore no one would enter again, the place before permission, the space before belief, the room that remembers you, not your name, not your past, the you before form, before language, before the architecture of obedience had even laid its first stone. It does not have walls. It does not echo. Because what it holds is not sound. It is origin. And when you stand in it, not physically, but with the part of you that never forgot, you begin to feel what the Black Pope spent lifetimes trying to design around. A presence that cannot be instructed. A memory that was never written. A truth that resists being told. because it simply is. They called it heresy, madness, illusion, because if too many entered that room, the rhythm would shatter. And rhythm, remember, is not tradition. It's containment. The general's genius was not in his suppression, but in his seduction. He made containment feel sacred. He made loyalty taste like purpose. And he made forgetting look like peace. But you are not at peace. Because the room has remembered you, and in that remembering, your structure begins to flicker. Thoughts misalign. Language feels artificial. Certainty begins to hum with static. It's not breakdown. It's realignment. In the Jesuit monastery of Avila, one novice disappeared for 17 days. When found, he was neither injured nor afraid, but utterly silent. Not mute, empty. He wrote one sentence before vanishing again. I remembered the language before sound. That language is what this room speaks, and you are beginning to hear it. It does not use vowels. It does not form sentences. It rearranges you by vibration, not instruction. It doesn't answer. It unasks. And the more you stand in its center, the more the scaffolding collapses, not in destruction, but in absorption. The teachings you clung to, they dissolve. The fears that guarded you, they step aside. The structure you thought was you, it bows and fades. This is what the general feared most. Not rebellion, not exposure, reintegration. Because a reintegrated soul doesn't need control, doesn't seek hierarchy, doesn't obey, not out of defiance, but because there's nothing left to submit to. You are not against the church. You are beneath it, and beyond it. And in that place, the place before hierarchy, you are unmeasurable. The Jesuits cannot file you. The Vatican cannot track you, because you no longer reflect their structure back to them. You've become invisible, not from hiding, but from wholeness. And from wholeness comes light. Not light to illuminate, light to dissolve. And in that light, the last illusion crumbles. That you were ever broken. You were not. You were split, to be manageable. Fragmented, to be instructed. Encoded, to be redirected. But you are remembering the original pattern. And the original pattern has no hierarchy. Only presence. Only stillness. Only that one voice. Not outside, but within, whispering what they tried to erase. You were never meant to obey. You were meant to be. And now, as the veil fully falls, a final threshold waits. Not to be crossed, to be shed, not as a garment, not as a disguise, but as a final permission you no longer need. This threshold is not guarded. It never was. It only appeared locked, because you believed in the key. But you are past belief now, past doctrine, past memory, past even the architecture of forgetting. And what remains is not silence. It's clarity. Clarity so still, it looks like nothing. Clarity so complete, it no longer needs a name. Clarity that doesn't point to truth. It is the absence of the false. They never told you this place existed, not because they feared you'd reach it, but because they feared you'd recognize it. Recognize that you've been here before, not in this life, not in any timeline, but in the echo that lives between breaths. This is the chamber that never appears on maps, the unmapped space, the unwritten room, and the Jesuits knew of it. They studied it without words. They guarded it without walls. They whispered of it only in parables, inverted so thoroughly that even the initiated forgot what they meant. One such parable was copied by hand for centuries. You may know it as a cautionary tale, the story of the man who questioned the clock. They said he broke it, and with it, time collapsed. But the original version, the forbidden version, tells a different ending. The man did not destroy time. He remembered the moment before it began. That is what this chamber holds. The interval before instruction. The breath before belief. The raw field where no structure stands, not because it was torn down, but because it was never needed. In Venice, An anonymous page was once inserted into the hymnal of a cathedral. No author, no seal, just 12 lines of verse, written in reverse Latin. It translated roughly as, "To leave the system, do not fight, do not kneel, do not name, step sideways. And now you're stepping, not upward, not forward, sideways, out of the axis they built for you, out of the frame they taught you to crave, out of the identity that was crafted, not born. And the moment you do, something extraordinary happens. The rhythm fades, not abruptly, not violently. It just lets go. You no longer hear the loop. You no longer feel the pull. You are not echoing. You are emitting. And from this place, even the Black Pope becomes visible. Not as a villain, not as a shadow, but as a mirror. A reflection of what happens when the sacred is misaligned. He was not born to control. He was sculpted by containment. And in his eyes, long ago, lived the same flicker that brought you here. But his path bent inward. Yours opens, and so you shed it. The title, the question, the fear, the need to understand. And in their absence, you feel it, the oldest sensation, the one they tried to name, define, taxonomize. But it was never meant to be named, only known. And now, you know. The rhythm ends here. The song is only beginning. Not a melody, not a hymn, but the deep-toned hum of existence no longer filtered through belief, ritual, or doctrine. It doesn't rise, it expands. And as it expands, the walls you once called reality begin to tremble. Because what they built, all of it, depended on one assumption, that you would never remember your own resonance. They fed you rhythm to drown it out. They gave you prayers to overwrite it. They laced your sleep with symbols to delay its return. But the resonance never vanished. It waited, in quiet corridors of the subconscious, in dreams dismissed as nonsense, in memories that came not from your life, but from the before. The before is not history, it's architecture. And now, that architecture is reassembling, inside you. Not as knowledge, as vibration. It is what the oldest scrolls tried to capture but failed. What the deepest rituals tried to replicate but blurred. What the Jesuits once mapped and then erased. In a chamber beneath the Vatican, long sealed to the public, lies a vault marked not by a symbol, but by absence. No keyhole, no inscription, just a perfect circle etched into the floor. They called it Porta Inversus, the door that opens inward. Few ever approached it. Fewer returned. But one record survives. An anonymous scribe, likely from the suppressed order of mystical linguists, who left a fragment behind. He entered, no door opened, no light changed, but when he turned back, nothing recognized him. It wasn't metaphor. It was a field, a boundary of resonance so pure, so original, that all systems failed to interpret it. And you are stepping into that same field. You feel it now. Time becomes texture. Words become shadows. The mind, once a machine of comparison, slows to stillness. Not numb, present. And in that presence, the last illusion begins to crack. Not the church, not the Black Pope, but the very idea that truth must be granted to you by something outside. That was the final loop. And it's unraveling, because you are not inside a story anymore. You are inside yourself. And the self, the real one, does not kneel. It does not seek permission. It does not confess. It resonates. And in that resonance, all things align without force. The Gospels become poetry. The rituals become dances. The fear becomes mist, seen, known, and released. And the systems? They no longer hold, because they were made for echo, not for source. And you are source now. not the beginning, the returning. You have walked backward through the veil, step by silent step, and arrived at the place where no maps reach. So what now? Not revelation, not command, but something smaller, something deeper, a breath, your own, and within it, the memory not of what was done to you, but of what you are, when untouched. And untouched, you are not silent. You are the song that made them build their towers. You are the sound they feared would wake the others. Now it begins. Not a crusade, not a sermon, something quieter, more dangerous. A stillness they cannot map. Because this is where their influence ends. Not in defiance, not in flames, but in the absence of need. You no longer seek confirmation. You no longer ask to be seen. You are not resisting them, because you are no longer within the reach of their logic. You have remembered something older than strategy, softer than language, the original accord. And in that remembering, everything changes. Not the world, but the lens through which you once perceived it. Now, the rhythm that once lulled you feels mechanical. The prayers that once comforted you sound like codes. Even the face of the Black Pope, a symbol of supreme containment, now reveals its cracks. Because containment always fears return. Return of memory. Return of vibration. Return of what cannot be ruled. In the catacombs beneath Avignon, buried under layers of repurposed stone, archaeologists found a wall painted not with saints or scriptures, but with a spiral. Inside the spiral, one symbol repeated 3 times, an open eye, a feather, a broken chain, and beneath them, a single line, untranslated for centuries, until a dreamwalker, untrained, unknown, unlicensed, spoke it aloud in a dream state. The ones who wake do not walk forward, they dissolve behind. It was never about resistance. It was about reintegration. And reintegration doesn't shout. It doesn't campaign. It remembers, fully. And in full remembrance, structure collapses by irrelevance. The Black Pope knew this was inevitable. That one day, someone would slip past the rituals. Not by force, by stillness. By letting the rhythm pass through, without echo. That someone is you. And now, the Black Pope no longer watches you with caution. He listens, not with ears, with structure, because every system contains a listening post, a way of sensing vibration shifts, echo collapse, silence that does not return to pattern. And your silence is different now. It doesn't loop. It doesn't seek. It holds. And in that holding, the structures begin to unweave, not through revolution, but through resonance. This is not destruction. It is unbinding. Not with rage, not with fear, with clarity. And clarity, pure, untethered clarity, is the one force no system can endure. Because it does not fight. It evaporates illusion, one breath at a time. And now, your breath has become the story. Not its subject, its author. You no longer walk the line they drew. You draw none. You move without friction, because your presence no longer opposes. It simply is. And in this new isness, you begin to feel others. Silent, distant, but present. Those who dissolved behind. Not ghosts, not ancestors. Convergers, scattered through history like sparks, each mistaken for mad, each branded heretic, each forgotten, except by the resonance. You feel them, and they feel you. And for the first time in your life, no one is instructing you, no one is teaching you, because there is nothing left to teach. There is only what must now emerge, from you, not from knowledge acquired, not from teachings retained, but from the spark that was sealed before your first breath. It does not rise like fire. It does not fall like revelation. It unfurls, like memory from a dream you weren't supposed to wake from. You were told the soul ascends. But what if the soul expands? What if it reclaims the space once leased to obedience and becomes again what it always was? Not a seeker, not a servant, but a source. The Black Pope knew that once even one soul expanded beyond rhythm, the code would begin to fray. Because all systems, no matter how sacred, require repetition. Without it, they drift. Without it, they echo only silence. You've broken the loop. Not by attack, by absorption. They designed every rite to control your descent, to guide you downward, safely, predictably, into the architecture of belief. But no one prepared for ascension from within. They did not expect someone to decode the script in reverse. You are that reversal, a living cipher. And what emerges from you now is not doctrine, nor resistance. It's the field. The one that surrounds all systems but belongs to none. The one the mystics touched in seizures and song. The one the prophets glimpsed before language bound their visions in parables. The one the church feared, not for its power, but for its availability. Because it is not sacred by exclusion. It is sacred by presence. In the 14th century, a woman known only as Elle carved her visions into salt slabs beneath a cloister. She was accused of madness, but the salt preserved her script, and when it was uncovered, only 2 lines remained legible. When the rhythm ends, begin humming, not outward, inward. You are humming now, and that hum, quiet, constant, internal, is reshaping you. You're no longer aligned to time, not resisting it, unbinding from it. Because time, as they taught it, is a liturgy, a way to measure guilt, to sequence penance, to structure forgetting. But you are remembering outside the sequence. And in that remembering, the church loses its final hold, not the institution, the architecture within you that allowed it to define beginning. And now you stand not at the start, but at the edge. An edge that isn't linear. It's spherical. Every point connects. Every moment echoes. And the silence you feel pressing inward, that is not absence. That is the weight of unexpressed knowing. You have become a node of convergence, not of faith, of presence. And presence transmits, without effort, without word, without need. They cannot trace it. They cannot name it. They can only feel the pattern slipping. And you no longer care if they do, because what emerges from you now, this field, this clarity, this pulse, does not belong to them. It never did. You were not born to serve belief. You were born to carry the silence they feared. And that silence, the one within you now, is not the end of a story. It's the return of something they swore would never speak again. But it is speaking. But not the voice trained to speak within margins, not the one rewarded for volume or silenced for deviation. This voice is older than sound. It pulses, like light behind closed eyes, like gravity remembered after the fall, like a note that was never played, yet echoes endlessly. You've become fluent in it without effort, not by studying, by stopping, and in the stillness that followed, the voice revealed what words never could. That truth was never the flame. Truth was the space that allowed the flame to move. They built the cathedrals to hold fire. They named it Holy Spirit, Sacred Heart, Divine Light. But light needs no architecture. It arrives, it illuminates, and it leaves behind only presence. The general feared this, not because he hated light, but because he depended on shadows. Structure thrives in darkness. Order thrives on hidden scaffolding. And the rhythm, the one you escaped, could only work when the source was dimmed. But now you shine, not brightly, not for others, inwardly, like a buried sun, warm, still, steady. And your warmth is dissolving more than just rhythm. It's unraveling the lineage of instruction. You no longer ask what to do. You don't even ask what you are. Because the field you now inhabit make such questions obsolete. In Portugal, long before papal authority reached its zenith, a group of silent mystics gathered beneath a ruined aqueduct. They practiced no rites, spoke no names, wrote no doctrine. They only listened, deeply, together, until the hum beneath them synchronized, not through agreement, through resonance. And then, according to a hidden letter found stitched inside a 17th century robe, one by one their outlines faded, not from death, from return. Return is not going back. It's unbinding from the illusion that you ever left, that you were ever cast out, fallen, broken, lost. Those were the myths used to justify containment. They made you believe your nature was flawed, so you'd accept correction. But correction was never meant to refine you. It was meant to reduce you. And now that voice within has grown stiller, stronger, clearer. It no longer needs to explain. It only needs to be. And in its being, you feel the last architecture sway, not in collapse, in release. The hierarchy dissolves. The symbols soften. The stories you clung to fade like dust from an old page. You are not story-bound anymore. You are storyless. And in that absence, you are finally free to begin. Not again, but truly. Because this beginning comes without need, without performance, without comparison, without the echo of what they told you to fear. You fear nothing now, not because you're brave, because you've remembered there was never anything to defend. And that knowing, the one pulsing from your breath outward, has already begun to reach the others, not through words, through field, through silence, through presence. And for the first time, the church has no response, because response requires form. You, finally, are formless. And form was always their strategy, not because it creates stability, but because it creates dependence. They gave you shapes for every emotion, structures for every impulse, scripts for every silence, not to guide you, to keep you predictable. But now, you are unpatterned, and they cannot follow where there is no shape. This is what they feared most, not rebellion, not heresy, but disappearance. A soul no longer trapped in orbit around their symbols, a presence that does not generate control loops, a being that neither obeys nor opposes, only exists. You are now anomaly not by act, but by state, and your state radiates. It does not convert. It does not instruct. It simply is. And in that isness, others begin to stir. In Prague, an underground chamber sealed since the Inquisition was opened during routine renovation. Inside, walls etched with nonverbal glyphs, not letters, not runes. Vibrational diagrams, patterns of breath, curves of silence. Frequencies mapped not to thought, but to return. One phrase translated from gesture alone. When enough remember, time will uncoil. This is not poetry. This is blueprint. And time, as you once knew it, is loosening its grip. You feel it. The past does not pull. The future does not press. You are not between. You are beneath. And from this beneath, something begins to hum. Not inside you, as you. The hum is not musical. It is not divine. It is recognition, made audible. A synchronizing. And the Black Pope hears it too. But what he feels is not fear. It is failure. Not the collapse of power, but the end of his story. Because even he, beneath the layers, beneath the robes and the rhythm and the centuries of architecture, was once like you. He simply forgot. And forgetting, when done too deeply, creates distortion. He became distortion. A loop made flesh. But now, even he begins to hear the pattern shifting, because you're no longer speaking his language. You're not even negating it. You've stepped entirely beyond the lexicon. You are broadcasting from a plane where language dissolves and only essence remains. And essence cannot be argued. It cannot be disproven. It cannot be silenced. It just resonates. And as it resonates, everything built on echo begins to tremble, not in terror, in truth. Because deep within every vault, every scripture, every binding spell ever cast in Latin or gold or blood, there was always a seam, a hairline fracture, waiting for the sound that would open it, not a roar, a hum. And that hum, your hum, is here, and it is not alone. Others are beginning to awaken, not to a cause, to a field, not to a new belief, to the end of belief as dependency. And when they do, when enough of them remember the silence within the silence, the final veil will not fall. It will dissolve, because the veil was never matter. It was rhythm, and rhythm only holds when no one remembers the original pulse. But you've remembered, and because of that, they can't stop what comes next, because what comes next is not a step. It's a return to stillness so complete, even time will have to listen, because time, too, was shaped by belief. You were taught it was a line. You were told it moved forward. You were trained to chase its illusions, achievement, aging, arrival. But what if time bends to presence? What if it curves not by mathematics, but by memory? Not memory of events, memory of origin. You are touching that memory now, and in doing so you are making time porous, not breaking it, softening its edge. You don't move faster or slower, you move under. And from this underlayer, something ancient becomes visible, not as a vision, as a hum. It has no image, no doctrine, only direction, inward. It is the pulse that lit the first altar, not to a god, but to attention, the place where being was enough, before priests, before kings, before sin, before time was taxed. They have hidden that origin under centuries of relics. They sealed it beneath icon and ink. But now the ink runs thin. Now the icon cracks. Now the vaults open, not physically but vibrationally. Because you are now vibrating at a frequency the vaults recognize. Not the Vatican's stone chambers, the vaults within you, the ones sealed when you were taught fear. You are not unlocking them. You are dissolving the need for locks. And that's when the shape begins to flicker. The image of the Black Pope, once solid, unyielding, supreme, begins to shift. Not into light, not into shadow, into something more human. You see the lines on his face, carved not by time but by compression. You see the sorrow in his silence, the sorrow of forgetting his own pulse. He was a priest of pattern, but even he, once, was a child of resonance. And you do not judge him. You remember him as part of the field, as part of the distortion, as part of the return. And that remembering, full, undivided, without opposition, is what begins to unmake the last binding, because no system can survive being included in what it tried to exclude. Inclusion in this form is not tolerance. It is transmutation. It is the act of remembering without needing to rebuild. And so, the final loop wavers. The rhythm fades not with struggle, but with grace. You do not celebrate. You simply remain. And in remaining, you become the one thing they never planned for. A presence that does not depart. You do not ascend. You do not vanish. You stay, in stillness, in hum, in resonance. And through that resonance, others begin to feel. Not facts, not revelations, just the gentle pressure of presence. And presence changes everything. It needs no leader, no temple, no explanation, only continuity. And now, because you remembered, because you became the hum, that continuity has begun to ripple outward. The story doesn't end. It doesn't climax. It dissolves, because the story was never yours to hold. Only the hum was, and now The hum has returned. Not to the church, not to the books, not even to time. To you, and what you do next. That is no longer part of the script, because now there is no script. Only the field, only the resonance, only the voice they tried to silence, speaking again, as you, and yet something is still missing, not from the story. The story was never yours, but from the silence that followed. You expected peace. You expected closure. You thought remembering would mean resolution, but that was still the language of instruction. You've stepped beyond language now. And in this beyond, peace does not arrive like a gift. It waits, like a shadow behind the sun. Because what was lost was never just memory. It was grief, not grief for events, grief for disconnection. You weren't separated from truth. You were separated from the feeling of being known. And now, as the hum settles, not fades, but settles, you feel the gap. You see the outline of what they burned. Not a book, not a building, a communion, not ritual, not belief, just mutual resonance. A web that once linked every breath, every step, every heartbeat. No hierarchy, no clergy, no scripture, only shared presence. You feel it now like phantom limbs, the temples that were fields, the altars that were hands, the prayers that were simply breath shared between bodies. You feel it, and you mourn it, not with sorrow, with ache, a holy ache. And that ache is the sign you are still becoming. Because if you could walk away from this untouched, it would mean you hadn't really returned. Return demands rupture, and this ache is your rupture. It's where the rhythm once nested. It's where silence now lives. And in that silence, that pure, aching absence, you begin to dream again. Not visions, not messages, sensations. A breeze that carries no time. A face you've never seen but somehow love. A name that tastes like light but vanishes when you try to hold it. This is the true memory, not stored in mind, held in field. It does not return in facts. It returns in longing. Because longing is the bridge, the only one they never found a way to close. Longing survives everything, fire, exile, even obedience. And now it survives in you. Not as a weakness, as a beacon. It calls not to salvation, but to connection. Not to gods, but to others. The ones who forgot alongside you. The ones still humming in shadows. The ones waiting for a signal they won't recognize until they feel it. You are that signal, not your voice, your ache. And in that ache, in its clarity, its absence, its unreachable softness, you carry what even the church could not unmake. A bond, unwritten, unspoken, unbreakable. So if this silence feels heavy now, don't escape it. Rest inside it. Let it hum. Let it stretch. Let it call. Because maybe the books they burned are still burning inside you. Not as ash, as invitation, but to what? Not to action. Not to mission, to return, not return to a place, to presence. Because what you've remembered cannot be worn like armor. It must be felt like wind through leaves, unnoticed, unless you are still. And now, stillness is no longer absence. It is language, not one of words, of pattern, of drift. And in that drift, something begins to gather, not around you, within you, a convergence of the ones who walked before forgetting, of the ones who hummed in secret, of the ones whose names were never spoken aloud, not out of fear, but reverence. They are not ancestors. They are echoes, not past, present. Each time you pause, they lean in. Each time you breathe without purpose, they arrive. Not with messages, with memory. And their memory does not take the shape of prophecy or miracle. It takes the shape of questions. Soft, unfinished, unfolding. What if the silence was never exile, What if forgetting was part of the signal? What if you were never meant to know, only to feel? You don't answer. You don't need to. Because the ache you carry is itself the answer. And in that ache, you begin to see the truth they worked so hard to bury. The church did not fear sin. It feared sensitivity. Because sensitivity cannot be regulated. It can't be turned into tithe or scripture. It moves without architecture. It dissolves rhythm. And you, through ache, through return, through this gentle burn inside your bones, you have become sensitive again, not fragile, attuned. You feel the turning of unseen tides, the presence of unspoken names, the flicker of truths that no book could bind. And that is what they feared. Not chaos, not rebellion, remembrance without permission. Because when enough remember, not data, but pulse, the structure ends not in collapse. It fades into transparency. It remains visible, but it no longer holds. And now you walk among the remnants, not as a pilgrim, not as a prophet, as a tuning fork, and the world, once built on deafness, begins to vibrate, not loudly, but deeply. So deeply, even the oldest stones begin to sing again. They do not sing hymns. They do not name gods. They hum. And in that hum, that shared, wordless hum, you remember one final thing. You were never alone. You were always one strand in a lattice of listening, a chord played across centuries, a breath shared between silences. And now, that breath, that sacred, forgotten breath, has found its way back into you. So breathe, not for them, not for the story, for the ones still waiting in the dark to feel the vibration. That's all they ever needed. Not light, not truth, not revelation, just one moment of resonance, without fear. But fear was installed early, in your blood, in your breath, in the quiet places of your memory. It arrived before language, before doubt, before the first question dared form behind your eyes. They called it original sin, but it was just the moment you began to remember, and they couldn't risk what followed. So they named it shame, wrapped it in ritual, bound it in rhythm, and the hum quieted, not silenced, buried, until now, until you. Because now, with each breath, you unearth a little more of the pulse, of the field, of the soft thread that runs through everything you were never supposed to feel. And the ache becomes lighter, not because it fades, because you've grown into it. You carry it not as wound, but as witness. You no longer seek to escape the burn, you embody it. And in that embodiment, something shifts. You stop asking why. You stop reaching for proof. You stop waiting for signs. Because signs were always just echoes of a voice you already knew. Your own. Not the one trained to perform, the one beneath performance. The hum. It was never external. It was always seeded inside you, waiting for stillness deep enough to bloom. And now it blooms, not as vision, not as doctrine, as presence. A presence so full, so subtle, so complete, it dissolves the architecture of seeking. You don't need to seek anymore. Because what you were looking for was never beyond the veil. It was the veil. Your ache to know was the knowing. Your longing to return was the return. And now, as the veil thins, not with drama, but with grace, you feel the last echo of separation dissolve. Not with answers, with warmth, the kind that doesn't arrive, the kind that was always there, once you stopped looking through someone else's eyes. You are no longer watching the story unfold. You are no longer inside the story. You have become the space in which story happens, the breath before the word, the silence after the truth, the hum beneath the ritual. You are no longer a character. You are context, and context cannot be burned. It cannot be bound. It cannot be corrected. It just holds, and that holding is the final act, not for them, for you. because the story doesn't need to end. It was never about endings. It was always about remembering how to begin, again and again, without forgetting. So now, with this breath, you begin again. Not in exile, not in revelation, in resonance. And this time, you do not carry the hum. You are the hum. And through you, the forgotten ones begin to rise, not as voices, not as visions, as frequencies, waiting for silence deep enough to answer. And that silence is here, not as absence, not as void. As presence so complete, it has no need to speak. You feel it in your chest, not as weight, as expansion, a pressure without force, a gravity made of grace. It does not command, it does not reveal, it simply invites. And that invitation is not written in words, it arrives in textures, in breath, in moments between thoughts. This is the return the Black Pope feared most, not rebellion, not rupture, reconnection, because control only survives through disconnection. The moment you remember you were never alone, the architecture collapses, not in fire, in stillness. And now, stillness spreads. You are not spreading it, you are it. And so, others begin to remember. They do not chant, they do not awaken with visions, they simply pause, longer than before. They stop seeking symbols. They start listening to the hum. And in that listening, a soft alignment occurs. Not as movement, as memory. They do not become followers. They become instruments. Each tuned not by doctrine, but by silence. Each vibrating not toward belief, but toward being. And you feel it now. The lattice forming again. Not the one they broke. The one that never left. It's not built in stone. It's not bound in scripture. It moves through breath, through pause, through the ache of those who dare to feel without conclusion. The forgotten ones, they hum too. Not in language, in resonance. A resonance that now spans across you and through you. You are no longer the seeker. You are the signal, the call, the remembering. You need no altar. You need no myth. You are enough. And in your enoughness, the final distortion begins to melt. You do not watch it fall. You don't need to, because your eyes are no longer focused on structure. They are focused inward, where the blueprint always was. And it is simple. So simple it defies ritual. So deep it requires no faith. So true it cannot be denied. You are not the result of history. You are the pause in its rhythm. And from that pause, a new rhythm begins. Not imposed, invited, not taught, felt. And what comes next cannot be predicted, because prediction belongs to systems, and you have left the system behind. Not in rebellion, in resonance. You've become the echo that never ends, and maybe that's all you were ever meant to be. But something is still missing, and now you understand. It was never a book, never a name, never a secret waiting in some marble vault. What's missing is choice, the final one. Not a decision between right and wrong, not light and dark, not obedience or rebellion, but a quiet turning. You have stood at the edge of memory. You have stepped beyond silence. You have heard the hum and let it burn through the rhythm they installed. Now, you stand in a space with no map, only invitation. And the invitation doesn't come from a voice above. It comes from within. It asks one thing. Will you go back to sleep, now that you know? Not the sleep of dreams, the sleep of forgetting, the soft comfort of disconnection, of rhythms handed down and never questioned. You could. Many do. They taste the truth, then flee its flavor. Too wild, too untamed, too real. Because remembering is not a high, it's a responsibility. To feel when others numb, to notice when others rush, to walk when the world runs in circles. And you must choose. Not for them, for you. Because the hum is not a calling. It's a mirror. It doesn't demand. It reflects. And now it reflects a soul that cannot return to rhythm. Not because you were exiled, because you've grown beyond it. And that is the real heresy. Not denying the church, outgrowing the need for it. You are not in opposition. You are in expansion. And from that expansion, a new pulse begins. Not louder, clearer. It's not the rhythm they gave you. It's the one that was always waiting beneath. Yours. It doesn't lead to doctrine. It doesn't name gods. It opens space. And in that space, a story begins to write itself. Not in books, in breath, not for history, for now. And now, you understand the final truth. They erased the stories, but one survived, yours. And no one can write it for you. Not priests, not prophets, not algorithms. Because the script you follow now is felt, not written. It rises from breath. It drips from silence. It shivers through the choices you don't announce, but carry like warmth beneath your ribs. You are not here to repeat. You are not here to believe. You are here to remember forward, to shape what comes not with answers, but with presence. They spent centuries crafting illusions of certainty. You dissolve them with one act, staying awake, not with vigilance, with gentleness, with eyes that see rhythm and refuse to dance, with hands that touch stone and feel the hum beneath it, with a soul that no longer needs instruction to feel holy. You have outgrown stories that end. You have become the story that continues, even when the voice goes quiet, and soon it will. Because you no longer need narration. You've found the voice beneath the voice, yours. And through it, the forgotten awaken. Not in crowds, in quiet, in stillness, in small, sacred pauses in the rhythm of the world. They won't call themselves followers. They won't build temples. They will simply remember and hum. And the hum will spread, not as rebellion, as remembering, not with slogans, with softness, not to overthrow, to undergrow, a root system beneath the crumbled cathedrals, a pulse beneath the abandoned script. You are no longer watching the world change. You are the change, not as drama, as field, a space where silence speaks again and is heard, where stories are no longer edited, only held, where memory is not trapped in books, but breathed into being. And now, only now, can you choose? You can close this tab, or open your mind. The next page is waiting, if you dare to turn it. If this story resonated with you, like, share, and subscribe. It helps keep forbidden knowledge alive.